Hi there. Today I'm going to introduce you to your first photography project. That project is called Elements of Art in Photography, and I'm going to kind of walk you through some inspiration and also kind of the layout of how the projects will work for this class. Just to give you a heads up, there are 6 projects that we will have for this class, and they're all photographic projects. Generally, the projects will consist of 15 images that you're submitting. The first couple projects, you will not be responsible for editing all 15. I just want you to edit your top 3, and I'll go over that in more detail here as we go through the Elements of Art presentation. So there's this saying that when you buy a camera, you're a photographer. But if you buy a guitar, then you're just a guitar owner. It's interesting these days that, everyone who takes a couple really successful images consider themselves to be a photographer. But as you'll find out with this class, it takes a lot more dedication and focus on the craft. These days, everyone seems to claim to be a photographer, as almost everyone owns a camera in one form or the other. There's great cameras on your smartphone. For this class, we will be using a DSLR. If there is an opportunity for you to also use your cell phone camera and you have Lightroom in the Lightroom camera that has manual settings, you may use that as well. Photography is a form of art. And as with any other art form, photography has some elements and those elements might not be the first thing that you think of when you take a photograph. But once you start looking at photographs, you will find out and you will notice that most of the most successful images, or the ones you find most visually striking, contain several of the elements of art. Sometimes we unconsciously utilize one or more of these elements when we compose an image. Someone with a really good grasp of these elements will look for these in any particular scene, no matter how plain it might look. You can find really, really beautiful imagery in a super minimalistic nature, even by photographing like folded paper. You'll be able to use the principles in the Elements of Art to photograph the elements that we will speak about today to hopefully create striking photographic pieces and elements within your work that will be visually pleasing. There are 7 elements that we're going to speak about today, and after you understand and are starting to look for them in your work, you will find out that your photographs will become immensely better. So, line, shape, texture, color, form, value, space. These are the basic elements of art that we're going to focus on for this project. Each of these elements plays a role in drawing the viewer's eye into the photograph. The first one we're going to speak about is color, and I think that's probably one of the most easy elements to talk about because we see color every day, and color creates a mood. Oftentimes, our eyes are drawn to the contrast between some colors. Colors can show repetition. They can have a contrasting mood to them. Colors can be seen in a natural environment, in an artificial environment. Color can be used really in kind of any sort of situation. So because we're living in, well, actually, I'm not sure where everyone is living at. We could be all over the United States or the planet at this point if we're taking the 8-week online class. So depending on your environment will also kind of depend on what colors you might potentially use for this project. I have some links within this lecture that I'll give you also, and it's just basic Google searches of, and what I did is I just put in Elements of Art color, and then you can kind of scroll through some images, and you may find that you're drawn to more of the like abstract nature of photographs, like here, or you may find that you're really interested in creating a scene in a portrait and a whole feeling within the photographs. So there's not going to be a specific subject matter that I'm going to have you guys photograph. This could be abstract, architecture, commercial, food, people, really anything that you find interesting. I just want you to challenge yourself to look for multiple elements of art within a photograph. The next element of art is line. There are many different types of lines, as you guys know: diagonal, horizontal, zigzag. Um, they all have an impact on your photography. Again, you've probably heard of the term leading lines, which are lines that lead the viewer into the subject. Lines are just like color and can have an emotional impact as well. So looking at the line and how those lines lead the viewer's eye to where you want them to go. So oftentimes line will kind of tell a story. This image, if I'm looking here, these lines are leading me to the subject who seems to be very isolated and lonely. If I look at this image here, the lines are leading me directly into her eye, like she has a secret to tell. Another example of lines in photography, you can do some really amazing things with shadows. This can be done with portraits or still lifes of objects. Looking for like long hallways or lines and repetition is also really nice. You can actually create your own scene using lines as well. And again, this is just a link, and all I did is I Google searched elements of art, photography, and line. And once you click on that, you'll see that there's just lots of examples. The next element of art is texture. So texture, again, there's multiple different textures that you can look for within your photography. Smooth, rough, sharp, those are all variations of the surface of an object. So oftentimes texture is used in abstract photography. So this is kind of a macro or close-up image of paint that is very, very old and chipping and peeling. Textures can be contrasting or curvy. They can show detail. They can suggest motion. Like if I look at this image, even though the plants are still, it has this like feeling of motion. Also, as does this. This is a scene that we're seeing quite a bit right now in Iowa. Even though the ice is still, I still have the sense of motion with that. Texture can be found, you know, in the hands or the face of people, people we love. They can be found in nature. Oftentimes we see texture in nature, and many times it's a repetition of nature. You can create your own scene of texture also if you choose to. This texture here is kind of just a fun, and again, you'll start to see multiple elements of art. I see texture here, but I also see line and color. So this image has multiple elements of art. And once you start really focusing on the 7 elements, you'll start to pick that up quite a bit. Again, I see texture and I see line. The next element I'm going to talk about is value. And value seems to be one of the elements that's a little more tricky for my students to kind of pick up on. So value refers to the relative lightness or darkness of a certain area, which can add drama to your photographs. So it's very easy to see value when it comes to black and white photography, because you've got like most of the time with really successful images that demonstrate the element of value, you will see white whites and black blacks, and then a variation between those two colors. Oftentimes you'll see images that are coming from a deep shadow. You'll see contrast of light and dark. And again, you'll start to pick up that you see some the element of line, the element of texture. These are all really great examples of value in black and white photography. We see value in color photography as well. It's just not as easy to see sometimes because it's so obvious in black and white photography. So value here, we've got this really beautiful bright yellow flower that's coming out of, you know, this kind of dark mossy area. These are some eggs that are set against a dark wooden kind of table. Portrait work can be done in this same kind of idea of tonal quality. So placing images in front of a light background or a dark background. Form. Form also is one that's a little bit more difficult to find without really, really kind of searching for it or setting it up. I feel like color, texture, and line happen pretty organically when you go out really searching for interesting compositions. Value and form, you really kind of have to force yourself and push yourself a little bit further to find these. Form is interesting to the viewer because an image that we have photographed will then look three-dimensional. So photography is a two-dimensional platform. We're generally looking at photographs on our smartphone or our computer or a printed version. And so that is always two-dimensional. So if you can take a successful image using the element of form, it's very interesting to the viewer because the image looks three-dimensional. You can make the viewer believe that he or she can reach into the photo and touch the subject. If that's the case, then you have actually successfully captured the form of that subject. Oftentimes you'll see that with form, you'll see a shadow that's involved. Shadows oftentimes will help show that element of form. The element of shape. Shape is the way the subject connects to each other in the photo. So what are the shapes that draw the viewer's eye to the subject? Oftentimes you'll see a repetition of shape. These two photographs, although the subject matter is different, they're also very similar because we've got these repetition of shape. This photograph was just taken underneath a picnic bench. And so you see these lines that have cast a shadow on the ground. If the composition of a photograph lacks shape, then often the photo becomes too busy or awkward to really fully appreciate. So a really great example of shape in photography is if the subject is silhouetted. So you see here that this plane, the light source is coming from behind, so we've got this really beautiful silhouette also here with this nature photograph. You'll see shadows play a big role in this as well. For this project, if you wanted to create your own shapes, that's completely fine as well. Okay, next we're going to talk about space. You've more than likely heard of negative or positive space, and this is a really good example of a negative space, how most of the image does not contain a subject, and then this negative space, again, will evoke a feeling of isolation or loneliness. Space can be positive or negative. Positive space is the object or the space a subject occupies, while the negative space is created between, around, or under, or through the subject matter. Negative space can help highlight an object. That's a prime example here. So the negative space here within this photograph of architecture is really highlighting the subject. These are also really great examples of utilizing space in a photograph. So this is another example of having a lot of negative space. Because the subject is not facing the camera, it builds a little bit of tension as to why is the subject looking away. Also, because we have a lot of the background here and the subject in isolation, it seems like perhaps there is a feeling of loneliness again and isolation. In contrast, this image here, we've got a very tightly cropped image, and the space seems to be very cramped. And so with this, and looking at the subject's facial expression, I have this sense of tension and the sense of, desperation that's here. So, oftentimes space can evoke a feeling or an emotion as well. Opposite, from this here, I'm like, this, even though there's a lot of negative space, when I look at this image, I see freedom and I see, a sense of newness or revival. So the project expectations. And I'm going to try to keep the project expectations similar for each of the 6 projects throughout the semester. You will be responsible for continuing your investigation of the elements and principles of art. So don't just stop with this lecture. I've got some videos I'm going to have you watch, and then do your own independent research as well. Finding some inspiration and start really looking around your environment and start kind of looking for the elements and principles of art before you pick up your camera. Start really training your eyes to start looking for these elements. And then it will be much easier when you go out to photograph to find these elements of art. It's your goal to capture at least 3 elements in each photograph. As you can see from the lecture, that's pretty easy to do once you start really focusing on the composition. Now, I am not forcing you. I'm not going to make you find 3 elements in each photograph. I will just tell you this. The more elements of art that you have in a photograph, the more visually pleasing and successful that image is. So I'm going to just tell you that that's your goal. Your goal is to look for 3 elements. And they could be the same elements. I'm completely fine with that. Maybe you want to put your focus on just looking for color, line, and texture. I'm totally fine with that. Or, maybe you want to try to have line in every one of your images, but then have line with tone, have line with value, have line with color. I'm going to let you kind of just plan that based on a few things. One, the environment that you're in, where some of you may be in an isolated environment. Some of you may have to deal with weather restrictions or, being in a home where there's, a lot of people sharing the space. And so you have to kind of set your parameters based on how you're going to be most successful. But make it your goal to capture at least 3 elements in each photograph. You will be submitting 15 images. That does not mean you're taking 15 images. Generally, I tell my students, you probably want to have a strong collection of, anywhere between 60 and 90 images to pull 15 that you feel are most successful. So you'll pull the 15 images you feel are most successful, and we're going to submit them into Canvas. 3 of those images, I'm going to have you edit using Lightroom Classic or Lightroom, the cloud-based Lightroom, or Photoshop if that's what you're more comfortable with. So you'll pick out 3 of the 15, and then I'm going to have you label them number 1, 2, 3. So I know which ones you feel are your most successful. That way I can give you some more feedback. In addition to that, the 15 images and then labeling your top 3, you will turn in a reflection paper. And so the reflection paper is just your thought process and how you felt the project went and what did you learn from it. Some other things that you can write about are what elements or principles did you investigate? What subject matter did you choose to photograph? So maybe the subject matter's all over the place, or maybe you decided to focus on portraits or abstract photography. And I'm not telling you that you have to pick a subject matter. This project could be 15 different subject matters. That's okay. So how does the subject matter reflect the specific elements and principles of design? So for example, if you're photographing architecture, the subject matter of architecture really kind of lends itself to the principle or the element of line. What aspect of the photograph, especially your top 3, do you think is most successful? What part of your photograph do you think is most visually striking? Another thing you could talk about is how could you improve on this collection of images and photographs? I will add this slideshow presentation into Canvas for you. In addition to that, please check out some of the videos that will be helpful for you when you're creating your compositions for the elements of art. I will also add a few student examples. I'm not going to add very many because I really want you to not be shouldn't say not be inspired. I really don't want you to look at what previous students have done to dictate what it is that you're going to photograph or not. This is a baseline project. I kind of want to see where your creative flow comes from and like what it is that you're interested in photographing and how you're composing things. So I want you to, clearly have some strong technical merit with these, whatever it is, best of your ability, because you're all coming from different experiences with using the camera. But what I'm really looking for is, what it is that excites you in the field of photography. I'm looking forward to seeing what you come up with.